In the spring of 2004, Japan was shaken to its core by a case so disturbing that it continues to echo across the internet to this day. At the center of it all was an 11-year-old girl from Sasebo, a quiet city in Nagasaki Prefecture. The name was Natsumi Tsuji, but most people around the world don't remember her by that name. They know her instead by a nickname that became infamous online, Nevada-tan. On June 1st, 2004, classmates at Okubo Elementary School noticed something unusual. Two 6th-grade girls had gone missing during lunch break. They were close friends, known to share notes, jokes, and after-school activities. But what unfolded inside one of the classrooms was anything but playful. Natsumi had lured her friend, Satomi Miterai, into an empty room. Teachers and students would later describe Natsumi as quiet, intelligent, even gifted with computers. But she had also developed a fascination with darker corners of internet culture, gory shock sites, and violent manga. For weeks, she had argued with Satomi online, exchanging hurtful comments that grew increasingly intense. The small quarrels that started on message boards turned into real animosity, and Natsumi carried that anger with her into the classroom that day. What happened next stunned an entire nation. Once inside the empty room, Natsumi attacked Satomi with a box cutter she had hidden in her belongings. By the time other students discovered what had happened, the scene was grim beyond imagination. Teachers rushed in and called emergency services, but Satomi's wounds were fatal. News of the killing spread instantly through the school, the neighborhood, and then the country. It wasn't just that a child had taken another child's life. It was the age of the attacker, only 11 years old, that horrified people. In Japan, where violent crime among children is exceptionally rare, the story became front-page news nationwide. The police detained Natsumi immediately, but what followed was even stranger. As television cameras surrounded the school, reporters captured a photo of Natsumi being led away. She was wearing a University of Nevada sweatshirt with the word Nevada printed boldly across the front. On the internet, particularly in Japanese forums like 2channel, that one image became an obsession. Memes, fan art, and even songs were made about Nevada-tan. The tan suffix is a childish variation of chan, a term of endearment. But here, it carried a chilling irony. This strange internet culture fueled the story's global spread. Suddenly, the case wasn't just a tragedy in Sasebo. It became one of the first viral examples of a true crime story being twisted into online folklore. In a way, the internet immortalized Natsumi, far beyond what any courtroom could have done. The Japanese justice system faced a difficult challenge. At 11 years old, Natsumi was below the standard age of criminal responsibility in many countries, but Japan had lowered its juvenile threshold after another high-profile case in the 1990s. That meant Natsumi could be held legally accountable. She was placed in a reformatory rather than a traditional prison, with the goal of rehabilitation rather than punishment. Officials never released her face publicly again, and her identity was tightly guarded after the initial media frenzy. The case triggered intense debate in Japan. Could someone so young truly understand the consequences of such an act? Was Natsumi a child in need of help, or was she an early example of pure malice? Parents worried about internet culture, violent media, and bullying. Schools doubled down on safety protocols, and lawmakers were pressured to reconsider the treatment of juvenile offenders. The Nevada-tan meme refused to die. Even years later, online communities would share the iconic sweatshirt image, debating whether Natsumi was a misunderstood kid or a symbol of something darker. For Satomi's family, however, there was nothing ironic or meme-worthy about what happened. They lost a daughter at only 12 years old, in a way no parent should ever have to imagine. In the years since, Natsumi's fate has been shrouded in secrecy. Japanese law prevents the release of her adult identity, and reports about her life after the reformatory are vague at best. Some say she reintegrated quietly into society, under a new name. Others believe she still carries the weight of what she did as a child. Whatever the truth, the public will likely never know. The story of Natsumi Tsuji stands as a chilling reminder that violence doesn't always come from hardened criminals or adults consumed by rage. Sometimes it comes from the least expected places, an ordinary classroom in an ordinary city, carried out by someone who was supposed to be too young to even think of such an act. The world may never know who Natsumi Tsuji is today, but everyone remembers Nevada Tan, the child who shocked a nation and then became one of the most infamous symbols of evil youth in modern history.
Who are you?
I'm back out here for a second. Do you recognize her?
Yeah, she's my daughter.
What's her name?
Isabella.
Is he insane? Your name is Samantha.
You're gonna ruin my whole life because I have some random crazy like me.
In August of 2013, a shocking crime in Aurora, Colorado, grabbed headlines across the United States and later became an internet phenomenon years after the trial ended. At the center of it all was Isabella Guzman, a teenager who appeared to have it all: youth, beauty, and a seemingly ordinary suburban life. But behind closed doors, her family life was marked by tension, arguments, and escalating hostility. Isabella was 18 years old, living with her mother, Yoon Hoi, and her stepfather. Friends and classmates described her as sometimes shy, sometimes defiant. Teachers said she struggled with authority. At home, arguments between Isabella and her mother had grown more frequent. According to her stepfather, the fights often centered on discipline, household expectations, and Isabella's growing independence. On the night of August 28, 2013, those arguments reached their breaking point. Yoon had been worried about her daughter's behavior, and had even asked Isabella's biological father to speak with her in an attempt to calm things down. He later said he left the home feeling unsettled, sensing the tension, but never imagining what would come next. That evening, while Yoon was showering, Isabella entered the bathroom armed with the kitchen knife. What happened next was an eruption of violence that stunned investigators. By the time her stepfather forced the bathroom door open, Yoon had been fatally attacked. The brutality of the scene was so overwhelming that officers arriving at the home were visibly shaken. Police quickly arrested Isabella near the family house. In court, prosecutors described a deliberate act of matricide, while the defense painted a very different picture. From the moment of her arrest, Isabella displayed erratic behavior. In her mugshot, she looked upward with an unsettling half smile, and during court appearances, she would sometimes stare blankly, smile inappropriately, or appear detached from the proceedings. As the case developed, it became clear that Isabella was suffering from severe mental illness. Doctors diagnosed her with schizophrenia, a condition marked by hallucinations, delusions, and a break from reality. In court, experts testified that Isabella believed her mother was evil, even inhuman, and that she had to protect herself from her. The jury ultimately found Isabella not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of prison, she was committed indefinitely to the Colorado Mental Health Institute at Pueblo. Under Colorado law, she would remain there until doctors determined she no longer posed a threat to herself or others. For many observers, this outcome stirred mixed reactions. On one hand, it was clear that Isabella was deeply unwell, and the law recognized her mental state. On the other, the sheer violence of the attack made it difficult for the public to accept that she would not serve a traditional prison sentence. What sets Isabella's case apart, however, is what happened years later. In 2020, clips of her courtroom appearances resurfaced online. TikTok and YouTube users shared short videos of Isabella staring into cameras, smiling eerily, or standing in court with a cold, detached expression. For a new generation of viewers, the clips were disturbing, fascinating, and instantly viral. The internet latched onto her as both a true crime figure and a meme. Some treated her with morbid fascination, others with misplaced sympathy, and many with outrage that such a horrific crime could become an online trend. It was another example of how modern internet culture can transform a tragedy into entertainment, often overshadowing the human cost behind the headlines. For Yoon Mi-hoi's family, the internet memes were salt in a wound that had never healed. Yet online, strangers debated Isabella's appearance, shared her photos, and even edited videos of her into fan compilations. Over the years, Isabella has continued to petition for release from the state hospital, claiming that treatment has stabilized her and that she is no longer a danger. In interviews with doctors, she has described her transformation, insisting that medication and therapy changed her life. But for the public, the question remains: should someone who carried out such a brutal act ever be allowed to walk free? For many, the image of Isabella's unsettling courtroom stare is what they'll remember. But behind that viral clip is a family destroyed, a mother gone forever, and a community still left to wonder how such darkness could erupt inside an ordinary home.
We were messing her out, and she fell back and hit her head.
Was your throat cut?
Yeah. Oh. You can't believe.
Grandma?
Oh my God.
In October 2009, a small town in central Missouri became the stage for one of the most shocking juvenile murder cases in modern American history. The crime wasn't just brutal, it was calculated, premeditated, and carried out by a teenager who seemed to live a double life. At the center of it all was 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante, a girl whose journals would later reveal a disturbing obsession with death. Alyssa lived in St. Martins, Missouri, a quiet community where most people knew each other. She was being raised primarily by her grandparents after her mother's struggles with addiction made parenting impossible. To the outside world, she looked like a typical teenager. She attended high school, spent time online, and hung out with friends. But beneath the surface, Alyssa's life was unraveling. As a child, she had battled depression and engaged in self-harm. She had once been hospitalized for a suicide attempt, and those close to her knew she was deeply troubled. Still, many thought she was working through her issues, managing school and social life in her own way. What no one realized was that Alyssa was already planning something unspeakable. On October 21st, 2009, Alyssa lured her 9-year-old neighbor, Elizabeth Alton, into the woods. Elizabeth lived only a few doors down and trusted Alyssa. For Elizabeth's family, it was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. She had gone to play at a friend's house and was expected home for dinner. But when she didn't show up, her family knew instantly that something was wrong. Elizabeth was the kind of child who followed rules, who never wandered off. That night, panic spread across the community. Neighbors searched fields and woods with flashlights. Police organized ground teams, and helicopters scanned the area. For days, hope and dread fought against each other. Elizabeth's mother clutched onto the idea that her daughter would be found alive. But the truth was already buried in the woods. Investigators soon focused on Alyssa. Her demeanor during questioning was strangely calm, even cold. Eventually, she cracked and led police to a shallow grave she had dug days earlier. Inside was Elizabeth. Alyssa admitted that she had strangled and stabbed the girl before covering the body. What horrified investigators even more was what they discovered in Alyssa's diary. On the very day of the murder, she had written about the killing in chillingly casual terms. After describing the act, she ended the entry with the single word, amazing. The misspelled enthusiasm read like a teenager's text message, but it described the deliberate ending of a child's life. That single page from her notebook became one of the most infamous pieces of evidence in American juvenile crime. The town of St. Martins was shattered. Neighbors who once waved at Alyssa's grandparents from across the yard now recoiled in shock. Elizabeth's family faced the unbearable grief of losing their little girl in such a calculated way. Meanwhile, Alyssa's relatives struggled to comprehend how the girl they had raised could do something so monstrous. Prosecutors wasted no time charging Alyssa as an adult. The crime was too brutal, too intentional. At trial, the defense argued that Alyssa was deeply mentally ill, pointing to her history of depression, medication, and suicide attempts. They described her as a broken child, crying out for help. The prosecution countered with her diary entry, the shallow graves she had dug in advance, and her own words to police. This wasn't a random outburst, they said. It was cold, methodical murder. In 2012, Alyssa accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. The sentence, life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus 30 years. It meant she would one day have a chance at release, but it also recognized the seriousness of what she had done. The case didn't end there. In the following years, the US Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional, sparking a wave of appeals across the country. Alyssa's lawyers tried to use this ruling to reduce her sentence. They argued that her age and mental health should give her another chance. But Missouri courts upheld her punishment, pointing out the extraordinary cruelty of her actions. The Alyssa Bustamante case continues to hold true crime discussions because it raises questions no one wants to ask. How does a 15-year-old develop the desire to kill? Could intervention have changed her path, or was it inevitable? Was Alyssa a victim of her own mind, or simply a predator who hid behind her age? In prison, Alyssa is said to have adjusted to life behind bars. Reports suggest she has taken classes and kept to herself, but the shadow of her crime will always follow her. Every parole hearing in the future will likely draw media attention, ensuring that the name Alyssa Bustamante is never forgotten. In 1968, the city of Newcastle upon Tyne in northern England was rocked by a series of crimes that seemed almost impossible to believe. The culprit was not a hardened criminal or a violent gang. It was a schoolgirl, just 10 years old at the time, named Mary Bell. Mary's early life was troubled from the very beginning. She was born into poverty, raised in a home filled with instability and neglect. Her mother was absent for long stretches, and her father figure was frequently in and out of trouble with the law. Teachers would later recall that Mary often acted out in class, showing both defiance and unusual cruelty for a child so young. Some classmates said she had a temper, while others remembered her as simply strange. On May 25th, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary lured a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown into an abandoned house. Hours later, his body was discovered by local children exploring the building. At first, police were baffled. There were no obvious signs of struggle and no clear explanation for the boy's death. Investigators initially considered it a tragic accident. But Mary didn't stop there. In the days after Martin's death, she returned to the neighborhood and began acting in ways that unsettled the community. She would ask other children if they wanted to see a dead boy and spoke about Martin's death with eerie detachment. A few weeks later, she struck again. On July 31st, 1968, Mary, along with her 13-year-old friend Norma Bell, no relation, lured another young boy, 3-year-old Brian Howe, to a nearby wasteland. What happened there was far more brutal than the first case. The child was found lifeless, with markings on his body that indicated intentional harm. Investigators quickly realized this was no accident. Someone had deliberately targeted the boy. The crime sparked panic in the community. Parents kept their children indoors, fearful that a predator was on the loose. When police began interviewing neighborhood kids, Mary's name kept surfacing. Her unusual behavior after both deaths raised suspicions. Teachers recalled her drawing disturbing pictures, and neighbors mentioned her fascination with the crime scenes. Eventually, Mary confessed, but her attitude was shocking. She spoke about the acts with little remorse, as if she didn't fully grasp the gravity of what she had done. At just 11 years old, she was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. The trial that followed drew enormous media attention. The idea of a child committing such violent crimes was nearly unthinkable at the time. Psychiatrists who examined Mary described her as intelligent but manipulative, with signs of psychopathic tendencies. They concluded she understood right from wrong, but lacked the empathy most children naturally develop. In December 1968, Mary was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, meaning for an indefinite period until authorities deemed her no longer a threat. Mary spent the next 12 years in various institutions. She was released in 1980 at the age of 23, given a new identity, and granted anonymity to protect her from public backlash. Years later, this protection was controversially extended to cover her daughter, allowing the family to live in secret. But the public never forgot. Mary Bell became a household name in Britain, symbolizing both the shocking potential for violence in children and the uneasy debate about rehabilitation. Should someone who killed 2 young children ever be given the chance to live a normal life? Was she a victim of her chaotic upbringing, or was she inherently dangerous from the start? For some, Mary represents the ultimate cautionary tale of what can happen when a child grows up surrounded by neglect and instability. For others, her story is proof that evil can emerge at any age, regardless of background. People wonder whether she truly changed after her release, or if the darkness inside her never really disappeared. We may never know the full truth, because Mary Bell continues to live under protection, hidden in plain sight, somewhere in the United Kingdom. In the summer of 2014, Japan was once again forced to confront the unthinkable, a violent killing carried out not by a hardened criminal, but by a high school girl. What made it even more shocking was the setting. The city of Sasebo, in Nagasaki Prefecture, had already lived for an infamous case in 2004, when 11-year-old Natsumi Tsuji, nicknamed Nevada Town, killed her classmate inside a school. Just 10 years later, Sasebo was back in the headlines for another tragedy that felt eerily similar, this time committed by a teenager known only as Go A. Her real name has never been released, in accordance with Japanese law protecting the identities of juvenile offenders. But the secrecy surrounding her identity has done nothing to lessen the infamy of her actions. To this day, Girl A remains a haunting figure in true crime discussions, an intelligent, quiet student who shocked her community with a crime that seemed to come straight out of a nightmare. The victim was 15-year-old Iwa Matsuo, one of her classmates at Sasebo High School. Iwa was described as cheerful, kind, and full of potential. She had friends, a supportive family, and a reputation as a bright student. By all appearances, she had a normal teenage life ahead of her. But on July 26, 2014, that life was stolen in a way that horrified even experienced investigators. The story began when Girl A invited Iwa to her apartment. It wasn't unusual. Classmates often visited each other after school, and Iwa had no reason to be suspicious. But what seemed like a simple hangout was in reality a trap. For weeks, Girl A had been showing troubling behavior. Reports later revealed that she had a history of dissecting small animals and had spoken to peers about her fascination with death. Teachers and counselors had noted her erratic moods and disturbing interests, and even her father had tried to get her professional help. But none of those warning signs stopped what was about to happen. Inside the apartment, Girl A attacked Iwa with a blunt object before using a knife to finish the assault. Afterwards, she carried out acts of mutilation. In fact, she even beheaded her classmate, a detail that horrified investigators and the entire country. When police questioned her, Girl A admitted to the killing almost casually. She told investigators she had simply wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. That cold explanation, combined with her age, left the country horrified. The media swarmed Sasebo, and within hours, headlines declared the case one of the most shocking juvenile crimes in Japanese history. The parallels to the Nevada Tan case a decade earlier made the story even more unsettling. Once again, in the very same city, a young girl had lured a classmate to her death. Once again, Japan was forced to ask how such violence could emerge from someone so young. The legal system faced a challenge. At 15, Girl A could not face the same penalties as an adult, but the brutality of her crime made rehabilitation seem nearly impossible. She was placed under psychiatric evaluation and eventually sent to a juvenile reformatory. Doctors diagnosed her with severe mental health disorders, noting her lack of empathy and her disturbing fascination with violence. Authorities kept the details of her treatment secret, and her current whereabouts remain unknown. For the family of Iwa Matsuo, secrecy provided no comfort. They had lost their daughter in an act of senseless cruelty. The grief was compounded by the fact that many people had raised red flags about Girl A long before the killing. Teachers had expressed concern, her father had sought medical help, and peers had whispered about her behavior. Yet somehow, those warnings had not been enough to prevent disaster. What makes the Sasebo High School case unforgettable is not only the horror of what happened, but the eerie sense of déjà vu it created. The same city had already been marked by the Nevada Tan killing in 2004, and now, just a decade later, another girl had repeated the nightmare. For many, Sasebo became synonymous not with its culture or history, but with two of the most infamous child-perpetuated murders in modern Japan.
Got big balls. They have such big balls. They're fancy. Big balls. That's what it's called now. They should spell it with a Z. Everything's cool.
In the summer of 2012, a small West Virginia town was shattered by a crime that revealed the terrifying cruelty that can hide behind the smiles of teenage friendship. The story of Skylar Neese's murder is one of betrayal, jealousy, and shocking indifference. And it is remembered today, not just for what happened, but for the chilling reason her killers gave. We just didn't like her. Skylar Annette Neese was 16 years old, a bright and spirited high school student living in Star City, just outside Morgantown. She was the only child of loving parents who described her as intelligent, witty, and ambitious. Skylar had dreams of becoming a lawyer and was known for her sharp sense of humor. Like many teenagers, she spent much of her time with her friends, hanging out, posting photos on social media, and sharing her life online. Her closest friends were Shelia Eddy and Rachel Shoaff, both the same age, both from the same school. To outsiders, the trio seemed inseparable. They took countless selfies together, attended sleepovers, and spent hours on Twitter and Facebook. But beneath the surface, the friendship was unraveling. By 2012, tensions had grown between Skylar and her friends. Skylar confided in others that Shelia and Rachel often excluded her or mocked her. On social media, she hinted at secrets she knew about them, cryptic posts that suggested betrayal. One tweet from Skylar just weeks before her death read, "Sick of being at the f***ing house. Sick of all the drama." Another ominous post simply said, "You're gonna regret this." On the night of July 6, 2012, Skylar climbed out of her bedroom window around midnight to meet Shelia and Rachel. Her parents assumed she was asleep, but a security camera captured her slipping into a car and driving away. That was the last time they saw her alive. When Skylar didn't return home, her parents immediately reported her missing. At first, authorities treated her as a runaway. After all, teenagers sometimes disappear for a night or two. But Skylar's parents knew their daughter. She was responsible, dedicated to school, and had never vanished without contact before. For months, her disappearance was a mystery. Her parents plastered flyers across town, pleaded for information on television, and never stopped pushing police to keep searching. Meanwhile, Shaylia Eddy played the role of grieving best friend. She tweeted about how much she missed Skylar, attended vigils, and stood alongside Skylar's parents as they begged for her return. Rachel, too, appeared outwardly devastated, but the truth was far darker. 6 months after Skylar disappeared, Rachel Schoaf broke down under pressure. During a police interview, she confessed everything. She and Shaylia had planned Skylar's murder for months. On that July night, they had driven her to a remote wooded area across the state line in Pennsylvania. Once there, they ambushed her with knives. Skylar fought desperately, managing to escape for a moment, but the girls dragged her back. Eventually, she was overwhelmed. Afterward, Shaylia and Rachel buried her body under brush and branches, leaving her in the woods as if she had never mattered. The motive? Rachel's chilling words said it all. We just didn't like her anymore. A confession stunned investigators and devastated Skylar's family. How could two girls who had shared her bedroom, her secrets, and her childhood carry out such a brutal plan? The betrayal was almost beyond comprehension. In January 2013, Skylar's remains were discovered in the location Rachel had described. With that, the missing person case became a murder investigation. Rachel Schoaf agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for her testimony against Shaylia. She was sentenced to 30 years, with eligibility for parole after 10. Shaylia Eddy, meanwhile, showed no remorse. Even as Rachel confessed, Sheila posted on Twitter about her daily life, maintaining a facade of normalcy. When her arrest finally came, it shocked those who had believed her act of grief. In 2014, she was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The murder of Skylar Neese became one of the most infamous teen crime cases in the United States, not just because of the brutality, but because of the sheer pettiness of the motive. This wasn't about money, revenge, or even jealousy over a relationship. It was about two girls deciding, in their own words, that they simply didn't like their friend anymore. For Skylar's parents, the pain is lifelong. They fought to keep her memory alive, campaigning for changes in state law to make it easier to issue Amber Alerts for missing teenagers, even when authorities initially believed the teen may have left voluntarily. Skylar's law, passed in West Virginia, is now her legacy, an attempt to ensure no other family waits as long as they did for action. The case has continued to haunt social media. People share screenshots of Shaylia's tweets after the murder, including one particularly chilling post made months later. "We really did go on 3. It was a cryptic reference to the fact that only 2 of them returned that night. The story of Skylar Neese is unforgettable because it captures the darkest side of teenage friendship, the kind of cruelty that hides behind selfies and status updates. It is a story of betrayal, so shocking that it feels like fiction, yet it was all too real.
Like, I wonder what it'd be like to kill someone, or I had made the gun go off, not purposely though, but like it went to the back of the room because I was just like screaming, just like shaking.
So somehow you pulled the trigger?
Yes.
Okay.
It felt like a million times, even like the first time, it felt like a million times.
So
I felt like just like spaghetti almost.
Right, okay.
In 2003, a crime in Clear Lake, Texas, stunned the nation, not just because of the brutality, but because of who carried it out. The killer was not a career criminal or gang member, but a teenage girl who, just months earlier, had been crowned Miss Irresistible at her high school. The name was Christine Paolilla, and the transformation from beauty queen to convicted murderer became one of the most shocking stories of teenage violence in American history. Christine's early life was marked by hardship. Born in Long Island, New York, she suffered from alopecia as a child, a condition that caused her to lose her hair. She wore wigs to cover the baldness and endured constant bullying. Her eyesight was also severely impaired, forcing her to wear thick glasses. She struggled to fit in and grew up feeling like an outsider. When her family relocated to Clear Lake, a suburb of Houston, Christine's life seemed to take a turn for the better. At Clear Lake High School, she met two popular girls, Rachel Colorautus and Tiffany Rowell. They befriended her, helped her with her appearance, and gave her the confidence she had long been missing. For the first time, Christine felt like she belonged. In 2003, she was even voted Miss Irresistible by her classmates, a symbolic victory for a girl who had once been mocked relentlessly. But underneath the surface, Christine's insecurities and troubled home life persisted. She began dating a boy named Christopher Snyder, and the relationship quickly turned toxic. Snyder was controlling and manipulative, isolating Christine from her friends. As her world narrowed, Christine's bond with Rachel and Tiffany grew strained. On July 18th, 2003, Christine and Christopher went to Tiffany Rowell's house. Inside were Tiffany, Rachel, and two other young men, Marcus Priscilla and Adelberg Matt Sanchez. What should have been a casual hangout turned into a massacre. Armed with guns, Christine and Christopher opened fire on the group. Within minutes, all four victims lay dead. The scene was devastating. Police described it as one of the most brutal multiple homicides in the area's history. The victims were shot at close range. The motive, investigators later argued, was rooted in resentment, jealousy, and Christopher's controlling influence. For Christine, the girls who had once lifted her up had become rivals, reminders of everything she felt she lacked. For 3 years, the case went unsolved. Investigators struggled to find leads, and the community was haunted by the unsolved murders of 4 young people. It wasn't until 2006 that a tip finally led police to Christine Paolilla. By then, her life had spiraled into drug addiction and instability. When confronted, she confessed her role in the murders. The trial captivated the public. How could a girl once celebrated as Miss Irresistible become involved in such a heinous crime? Prosecutors painted Christine as an active participant, not a passive follower. They argued that she had every chance to stop the killings, but instead chose to take part. The defense countered that Christopher Snyder manipulated her, exploiting her insecurities and pressuring her into violence. In the end, the jury was not swayed by her pleas. Christine was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Christopher Snyder never stood trial. He took his own life before police could arrest him. The case remains one of the most infamous examples of teenage violence in the United States because of the stark contrast it presents. Christine was not a stereotypical bad kid. She had once been the bullied outsider who overcame adversity to win a popularity contest. She had been the girl other students looked at with sympathy, even admiration. Yet behind the title of Miss Irresistible was a young woman consumed by insecurity, envy, and the toxic influence of a manipulative partner. Even today, the story raises uncomfortable questions. Was Christine a victim of Christopher's control, or was she always capable of such violence? Did years of bullying and rejection plant the seeds of resentment that finally exploded in bloodshed? Or was this simply an act of selfish cruelty disguised as desperation? For the families of Rachel, Tiffany, Marcus, and Matt, there are no answers that can bring back their loved ones. Was it manipulation, mental illness, or pure malice? Perhaps it was all three. What cannot be denied is the lasting impact of her actions. She went from a bullied girl turned high school beauty queen to a convicted murderer in just a matter of years. The duality of her life, the public image of Miss Irresistible versus the private reality of a teenage killer, is what makes this case unforgettable.
When asked, why you did it, she said, "I don't like Mondays." I mean, that's kind of a bizarre sociopathic comment. That means I don't really care. I just wanted to spice it up. I don't care what happens to everybody else.
On January 29th, 1979, America witnessed one of its earliest and most infamous school shootings. The attacker wasn't an adult with a long history of crime. She wasn't even a student at the school. She was a 16-year-old girl who lived across the street from Grover Cleveland Elementary in San Diego, California. Her name was Brenda Ann Spencer, and her explanation for the attack became a phrase that would echo through history. "I don't like Mondays." Brenda's early years gave glimpses of the trouble to come. She grew up in San Carlos, a suburban neighborhood outside San Diego, living with her father after her parents divorced. Money was tight. The home was described as bare and cold, and Brenda's relationship with her father was complicated. Teachers remembered her as bright but disruptive, a girl who sometimes clashed with authority and struggled to fit in socially. She often dressed in dark clothing, wore her hair shaggy, and gravitated toward isolation. Beneath the surface, Brenda was battling depression. Friends later said she joked about violent acts and spoke casually about wanting to do something dramatic enough to get attention. Some of these remarks were brushed off as teenage angst, but others seemed like red flags. One chilling detail that stands out is that Brenda had told classmates she wanted to do something big so she could make the evening news. In December of 1978, Brenda's father gave her a rifle as a Christmas present, .22 caliber, semi-automatic. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an odd choice for a 16-year-old girl, especially one with a documented history of depression. But in the late 1970s, firearms as gifts were not unheard of. In Brenda's hands, though, that rifle became the instrument of tragedy. On the morning of January 29th, 1979, Brenda positioned herself at the window of her home, directly across from Grover Cleveland Elementary. It was a Monday, and children were gathering outside the gates for the start of school. Armed with her rifle, Brenda opened fire. Panic erupted immediately. Students screamed and ran in every direction, some dropping to the ground to avoid being hit. Principal Burton Ragg rushed outside to help the children, attempting to guide them to safety. Custodian Mike Sucha also ran to shield students. Both men were shot and killed in their efforts to protect the children. 8 students and a police officer were wounded in the chaos, but miraculously, none of them died. The bravery of staff and the quick arrival of emergency responders saved lives that morning. As police surrounded the Spencer home, a tense standoff unfolded. Brenda remained inside for hours, refusing to come out. During the standoff, a reporter from the San Diego Tribune managed to get her on the phone. When he asked why she had opened fire on children and staff, Brenda's reply was as casual as it was horrifying. "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." That one sentence became the headline across the country. It was quoted in newspapers, repeated on television, and ultimately immortalized in popular culture. The Irish rock band, the Boomtown Rats, later wrote the hit song "I Don't Like Mondays," inspired directly by her words. Eventually, Brenda surrendered and was taken into custody without further violence. Investigators searched her home and confirmed she had carried out the attack with the Christmas rifle. The trial was swift. Despite her age, Brenda was charged as an adult. In court, her defense pointed to a history of depression, suicidal thoughts, and even possible brain damage from a bicycle accident. Psychiatrists testified that she suffered from serious mental health struggles, but the prosecution argued that she knew exactly what she was doing, and her own statement to reporters reinforced their point. In 1980, Brenda pled guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Because of the way California's parole system works, Brenda has been eligible for release multiple times over the years. Each time, parole boards have denied her request, citing concerns about her lack of remorse and the danger she might still pose. The impact of Brenda Ann Spencer's crime goes far beyond San Diego. At the time, school shootings were incredibly rare. The idea of a teenage girl deliberately targeting elementary school children was almost unthinkable. Her age, her gender, and especially her casual explanation made the case resonate worldwide. For the families of Principal Ragg and Custodian Sucha, the pain has lasted decades. Both men were remembered as heroes who gave their lives protecting children. For the students who survived, The trauma of that Monday morning followed them into adulthood. Many later described lingering fear whenever they set foot near a schoolyard. Today, Brenda Ann Spencer remains incarcerated, her parole denied again and again. Whether she will ever be released is uncertain, but her name will forever be linked to one of the earliest and most chilling examples of schoolyard violence in America. In the winter of 1958, America was captivated and horrified by a killing spree across Nebraska and Wyoming that left 11 people dead. At the center of it all was a teenage couple, 19-year-old Charles Starkweather and his 14-year-old girlfriend, Caril Ann Fugate. Their names became synonymous with teenage rebellion, violence, and cold-blooded murder. But while Starkweather was executed for his role, the question of Caril's guilt has never been fully resolved. Was she a willing accomplice or a terrified captive caught in his deadly grip? Caril grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. At just 13, she began dating Charles Starkweather, a young man already on the margins of society. Charles idolized James Dean and dressed in the rebellious style of the 1950s, slicked back hair, leather jackets, and a defiant scowl. But beneath the image was a troubled young man with a violent temper and a fascination with death. Caril, still a child in many ways, became infatuated with him. By January 1958, their relationship had spiraled into infamy. After an argument with Caril's mother and stepfather, Starkweather snapped. On January 21st, he shot and killed Caril's mother, Velda, her stepfather, Marion Bartlett, and her 2-year-old half-sister, Betty Jean. The bodies were hidden in the home, and for nearly a week, the couple stayed there as if nothing had happened. Caril claimed Starkweather told her that her family was being held hostage and that if she didn't obey him, they would be killed. What followed was a week-long rampage that terrorized the Midwest. Starkweather and Caril stole cars, fled across Nebraska, and killed anyone who crossed their path. Their victims included local teenagers, a wealthy farmer and his wife, and even a traveling salesman. By the time they were captured in Wyoming, 11 people had been murdered. The manhunt for Starkweather and Caril dominated national headlines. Newspapers compared the young couple to Bonnie and Clyde. The idea of teenagers, especially a 14-year-old girl, being at the center of such carnage shocked the nation. America was in the middle of the 1950s juvenile delinquency panic, and this case seemed to confirm everyone's worst fears. When the pair was finally caught, Starkweather immediately tried to pin much of the blame on Caril. He claimed she had been just as involved in the killings as he was. Caril told a different story. She insisted she was his prisoner, forced to accompany him under threat of violence, and that she had no choice but to obey. The courts didn't buy her story. In 1958, Caril Ann Fugate became the youngest female in U.S. history to be tried and convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison at just 15 years old. Starkweather, meanwhile, was sentenced to death and executed in the electric chair in 1959. Caril served 17 years behind bars before being paroled in 1976. After her release, she moved to Michigan, married, and lived quietly, avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. Yet the debate over her guilt has never gone away. Many argue that Caril was simply too young to have been a willing participant. They point to her age, barely a teenager, and the psychological hold Starkweather likely had over her. They note her consistent claim that she believed her family was alive during the first days of the rampage. To them, Caril was as much a victim as the people Starkweather murdered. Others see it differently. They argue that Caril had opportunities to escape, that she stayed with Starkweather far too long to be innocent, and that her story of being a hostage was too convenient. The brutality of the crimes, they say, couldn't have gone unnoticed by someone traveling with him day after day. In her later years, Caril spoke publicly about her innocence. She maintained that she was manipulated, terrified, and powerless as a 14-year-old girl caught in the orbit of an older, violent boyfriend. She sought a formal pardon, though it was never granted. In 2020, she appeared in a documentary once again telling her side of the story, insisting she was not the cold-blooded killer history painted her to be. Regardless of which version of events one believes, the facts remain chilling. 11 lives were lost in a spree of violence that gripped the nation. Today, Caril lives quietly in her 70s, far removed from the girl she once was. Yet her name remains synonymous with one of the darkest chapters in American juvenile crime history. Her case forces us to confront the uneasy reality that innocence and guilt are not always easy to separate, especially when youth and violence collide.
Please love your children. Please love every second you have with your children. Never think that they know you love them. Always tell them you love them. Always watch over them, make sure they're safe, know where they're at, who they're with, and never take them for granted.
In January of 1992, one of the most shocking cases of teenage violence in American history unfolded in Madison, Indiana. The victim was Shanda Sharer, a 12-year-old girl, full of life, excitement, and promise. The killers were not hardened adults, but 4 teenage girls, 2 15-year-olds, a 16-year-old, and 17-year-old, who carried out one of the most disturbing group crimes ever recorded. Shanda Sharer was a lively middle school student who loved cheerleading, music, and spending time with her friends. She was described as funny, outgoing, and full of energy. But her budding teenage relationships would ultimately put her in the crosshairs of a dangerous feud. At the center of the conflict was Melinda Loveless, 16 years old, who had been dating another girl named Amanda Heverin. When Amanda and Shanda began to grow close, Melinda's jealousy boiled into obsession. She viewed Shanda as a rival who had to be removed. On the night of January 10th, 1992, Melinda put her plan into motion. She enlisted 3 other girls, Lori Tackett, 17, Hope Rippey, 15, and Tony Lawrence, 15. Together, they lured Shanda from her home under the pretense of meeting Amanda. Shanda trusted them enough to sneak out that night. She had no idea she was walking into a nightmare. The group drove Shanda to a remote location where Melinda revealed her true intentions. What followed was hours of cruelty and terror. Shanda pleaded for her life, but the older girls mocked her, threatened her, and brutalized her. In the end, they subjected Shanda to hours of abuse, including sexual assault, before finally strangling her and setting her body on fire. By morning, the girls returned to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. They laughed, ate breakfast, and spent time with friends. But their crime unraveled quickly. Tony Lawrence, racked with guilt, confessed to her parents within days, and the full story came spilling out. The arrest of the 4 teenagers shocked the country. The brutality of the attack was horrifying enough, but the age and gender of the killers made it even more incomprehensible. Teen girls were supposed to be worrying about dances, homework, and their futures, not planning and carrying out a murder. The trial revealed disturbing details about each of the girls. Melinda Loveless, the ringleader, had grown up in an abusive household marked by instability and trauma. Lori Tackett, the oldest, came from a deeply religious but troubled home, and she displayed signs of fascination with the occult and violence. Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence were seen as followers, dragged into Melinda's jealousy-fueled plan. Prosecutors faced a dilemma. The girls were juveniles, but the crime was so extreme that leniency seemed unthinkable. In the end, all 4 were tried as adults. Melinda and Lori received the harshest sentences, 46 and 60 years in prison, respectively. Hope Rippey received 60 years with 10 suspended. Tony Lawrence, who confessed early and cooperated with authorities, was sentenced to 20 years. For Shanda's family, no sentence could bring justice. They had lost a daughter in the most horrific way imaginable. Her mother, Jackie, became an outspoken advocate, determined to keep her daughter's memory alive. Over time, Jackie even did the unimaginable. She forgave Melinda Loveless, the girl who had orchestrated her daughter's murder. In an extraordinary act of compassion, Jackie corresponded with Melinda in prison and eventually supported her rehabilitation efforts. What grips people is not just the brutality of the crime, but the group dynamic. How could 4 teenage girls feed off each other's cruelty, escalating to the point of murder? How could peer pressure, jealousy, and rage combine into such a destructive force? In the years since, all 4 of the perpetrators have eventually been released from prison, though at different times. Their reintegration into society has been met with outrage by many who believe they should have remained behind bars. Their story is a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how dangerous it becomes when jealousy and cruelty take root in the hearts of the young. From the schoolgirl in Japan who struck down her classmate, to the teenagers in America who destroyed their own best friend, these cases reveal the darkest side of youth. They are the daughters who betrayed trust, the friends who turned into predators, and the girls who proved that age does not guarantee innocence. They are, without question, among the most evil teen girl killers in history. If you found this dive into these disturbing cases compelling, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. And let us know in the comments, out of these stories, which case shocked you the most.